biblical definition of worship. I want to suggest to you this morning that Christian worship is an attitude and an action of granting God the adoration, the reverence, homage that he is due. Worship is the expression of God's holiness, of God's goodness, and of God's power. It is also a way to express love for God. So Christian worship takes the form of many different practices, many different lifestyles and events. It is both individual and it is as a congregation. Let us look at some key aspects of worship that all Christians should know. Now, it doesn't matter how long you've been a Christian, whether it's been 1 day, 1 hour, most of your life. Our revelation of God should always lead us to worship. Worship is the act of expressing reverence, honor, and respect to God. And furthermore, worship is laying aside oneself and all else to recognize God. Worship is also the statement that only God deserves all praise, only God deserves all glory, and only God deserves all honor. And we sing that in song. It is also a willing obedience to God's command out of a place of love. So simply put, we worship God because he is worthy and because he has worked in amazing ways in our world and indeed on our behalf. And even if he didn't do all these things, the character of who God is worthy of worship, is worthy of praise, is worthy of honor, and is worthy of constant glory. The thing is that worship, when we worship God, it replaces worship of anything else. You see, the Bible tells us that God is a jealous God. He's a jealous God, and he despises the worship of idols and other worthless things. And we get like that sometimes in our lives, where we don't sometimes realize it, but because of our focus on other things, it becomes an object of worship. In order to truly worship God, Christians must devote themselves only to God and to serve him as the one and only true God. What is a life of worship? Worship is a mindset and a lifestyle. That's why I started with a question this morning. How do you worship, and when did you begin to worship this morning? Today. So, for example, a Christian can live with an attitude of worship no matter what he or she is doing. Believers can do all things as long as they are not in contradiction of Scripture, as if they are doing them for the Lord. Making all things an act of worship. When we do things, do we see it as an act of worship? Well, if it's not in keeping with God, if it's not pleasing to God, it cannot be an act of worship to God. Whenever the first and second commandments are followed, and we know what those are, you remember the question was asked, and the answer was, thou shalt love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, all your might, and all your strength. First commandment with a promise. And the second, it says, is like unto the first, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. Matthew 22, verses 37 to 39. An easy way, I think, to check if you are worshiping God is if you are following the basis of these commandments with a pure heart. You see, the way believers worship has changed over the course of history, and indeed over the course of the two covenants of the Bible, the Old Testament and the New Testament. But the heart of the matter has remained the same. Worship is then that of a pure heart and a desire to connect with the Creator and with the Sustainer, who is the sustainer of all.